So today what I want to tackle is what are spirits, what are they, what are the beliefs that surround them. We're going to take things from a basic perspective, and again, the point of witchcraft is that it needs to be practical. We need to understand what it is that we're working with. So when it comes to spirits and things like that, it's not for me to tell you exactly and define it exactly why it is and to say whether gods exist or not exist. You might not have that belief. It doesn't really matter. Obviously we need to be able to have a conversation though, and we need to define and explain the language in which we're using. The good thing about witchcraft is the fact that we'll take concepts and practices and then we explore them and make them practical, taking them apart, melding things around. We're immersing ourselves in concept and energy that to a certain extent we don't fully understand ourselves, but it's our aim to work out what it is, how it works, and then control it to make it work for our advantage, perhaps. So what I'd like to do is take you through not necessarily the general consensus of what spirits and deities and that are, but when you talk to the witchcraft community, other witches, pagans, people that practice magic, whether it's me or Chris, whoever it is, whoever works with this sort of thing, what it is that they would really say a deity or a spirit is. How are we going to put it in a way that we can communicate with each other without squabbling over specific terms. So where should we begin? I suppose the simplest thing would be to, at the end of the day, think of it in terms of, if you're talking a spirit in general, then a spirit is essentially something that has some sentience that isn't necessarily, well, it's not going to have a body, is it, at the end of the day? It's going to be non-corporeal. So if it has an energy and sentience, it is sentient energy, it's going to be a spirit. It's going to be something non-corporeal, it's not going to have a body. So that's a big umbrella term at the end of the day. So what about things such as ghosts? Now ghosts is a term which I don't particularly like, and I know that a lot of other witches won't necessarily use this term because it comes from, it's generally used by people that are quite ignorant and don't really know anything about this sort of thing. So when you're thinking of ghosts, you're thinking of stories, ghost stories, that sort of thing. Someone's seen something that they can't explain. You're thinking of paranormal investigators messing around with equipment they don't really understand how it works, with things that they can't really even see or sense to make spooky things happen. So when it comes to ghosts, obviously stereotypically it's thought that they are the soul after the person dies, so they're the soul of the person after they die. But again, that's not really the case. If you look at ghost stories, if you look at investigations, paranormal investigations, that sort of thing, where you've got a ghost, there can be many different types of ghost. So if we don't really use the term ghost, but if we go into a little bit of detail, the terms that people put under that category, then that might be a little bit beneficial because we might be able to use some of those words. So the first thing would be that kind of idea of a pre-recording or a recording of something that just gets triggered. So whether you're thinking of the grey lady that walks down the stairs every Friday night, or you're thinking about looking on a road that used to be an old Roman road and you see centurions marching along the road, that's something that isn't necessarily sentient. It's really something that is kind of a recording, and that it's triggered when the conditions perhaps are the same as when the recording took place, and that it just keeps going and going and going, and someone might see it or pick up on that. Sometimes even equipment perhaps might pick up on that. So that isn't really any interest whatsoever to the witch. It can be quite amusing to see these things, but at the end of the day, what can that do for us? It isn't practical, is it? So when you're talking about what they call stone tape theory, which is a kind of a paranormal investigation term now, is the idea that something can be held as a recording. So the essence of something happens, whether it be someone walking through a room, whether it be a conversation, anything like that, doesn't just have to be visual, then that thing is essentially a recording that's triggered and people are picking up and seeing it. So the problem with this is the fact that it's not necessarily just going to be a recording of someone that's dead, and it's not going to be sentient. So for example, there are lots of cases that you can research and look up where people have seen a ghost, and it's been a ghost of someone that's still alive. So whether someone moves into an old lady's house and they see the old lady sitting in the chair, and then they do the research and find out, oh, there's a picture of the old lady that was there, that's who I saw in the chair, and she's still alive in the nursing home down the road. You know, it's one of those things that there are ghosts of people that are still alive. So again, it's a recording, it's just not, it's of no interest. And it serves no practical purpose for us to really even bother working with that thing. So the next thing would be the poltergeist. So the poltergeist is characterized, and it kind of gets put in the ghost category of some sort of malicious or troublesome spirit that ends up trashing the place and moving objects around the room. What you'll find if you're a witch and you can sense energy and what is comprised of and types of energy, is when you go into a place where there's a poltergeist, is not something that's attached to the surroundings, the building or the land is in. It's got nothing to do with that. What it is some form of build up of what I suppose you could call psychic energy, but essentially energy built up by someone that's psychic. It feels a lot like tension. There's a tension that builds up and then it has to erupt, explode, and it very often does that in a destructive kind of way. Now, very often this energy will focus on a person or a couple of people that have a certain amount of natural psychic ability. They're naturally able to build, to a certain extent, control energy, but they're generally unaware of it. Now, the worst cases that you tend to find with poltergeists and stuff like that are ones where the child is, well, it's a child at the end of the day, so it's, you know, what are children? They don't necessarily have the same kind of perceptions of the world as adults do, so they don't necessarily know what is possible or put things in a category of what's possible and what's not possible. They're also growing, you know, hormones, all that sort of thing. Their minds are developing. So when it comes to building and controlling energy and stuff like that, that can be quite a funny mix. So when you look at cases, then you'll often find that there is a child which has a lot of potential to be able to raise and control energy, but they're in a situation very often that there's a lot of tension in the environment. I don't know whether mum and dad are arguing or something like that, but they're in a situation where they've got this build up of energy and they don't really, they can to a certain extent sometimes sense it, but they can't direct it efficiently, and it normally erupts and comes out. I think of it in terms of, from clients that I've had and from situations I've been in where I've seen this, it can be a little bit like ADHD. So people say that they will medicate their children because their children have ADHD and they're constantly jittering and need to be moving and doing stuff, which up to you whether you do that or whether you think that's a healthy thing. But that's kind of what you're dealing with. You're dealing with someone that naturally builds this energy and they're unable really to control it to a certain extent, and it tends to take the form or a form that the person that's building it gives it by accident. So the thing with children, of course, is they can be scared quite easily. They're scared of the thing that's under the bed, they're scared of the thing that's in the wardrobe or the cupboard or something like that. So when they've got this psychic energy that they're building up, then that can take the form of something that they find scary. And what do scary monsters and ghosts and things do? Well, they cause all sorts of trouble. So, and again, it's not exclusively children, it does happen in adults. I had one case where, because it's the same thing that tends to happen over and over again, everyone thinks that because something weird and spooky is going on that somehow their house is haunted. So I went to see this family who says they had a haunted house, and what actually happened was one or two members of that family were really quite, they were kind of firecrackers, so they are naturally adept at building energy, and because they are somewhat to a certain extent hot-headed, I see a couple of people, I've met a couple of families in fact that are like this, is that they're all living under one roof and it kind of erupts. So the energy, you can see it build and build and build and build and build until it gets to the point where and that will manifest in some quite strange phenomena, where from things tearing through the house and objects moving around the room, that sort of thing. But at the end of the day, there's nothing sentient there. It's just the energy is built up and released to a certain extent. Sometimes, again with children or with people, when that person then starts to believe there is something there, then that energy will take that form because that person's believed that it has. So they've affected it, they've programmed it. Okay, quite sloppily, they've not done a very good job of it, so it's not quite the same as an egregore or something like that, but it is a kind of thought form. That's how that manifests. So anyway, the next thing is you're talking about ghosts in the stereotypical sense of what people believe are left over, or what's left over of a person after they've died. So the eternal soul, that kind of thing. So someone dies and then their essence lives on. That should technically be sentient. So people that come into contact with or interact with some kind of spirit that seems to be human. It might look human, it might talk like human, and it might think that it is human, and very often than not doesn't realise that it's dead, that sort of thing. Very often that would be, to a certain extent, I suppose, the remnants of a person's essence. Now we can go into that in a bigger detail, like what happens after you die and all that sort of thing, and various different theories and my personal experiences with that sort of thing at a later date. But at the moment you're thinking in terms of the stereotypical ghost, that which lingers on after the physical body is dead and is, generally bound to a specific area or thing, to the earth. Normally doesn't change. So very often what you'll find, unless you take that kind of a spirit, so that kind of remnants of a human spirit, and work with it and feed it, then it will to a certain extent dissolve. There's a reason why you don't see a lot of really ancient ghosts. Like to see a ghost which is 10,000 years old, a little weird. 1,000 years old, couple of thousand years old, does that happen? You don't really hear about it. It's always like 100 years or a couple of 100 years. It's not really ancient ghosts, is it? And from my experience with that and in studying them, is that they tend to a certain extent dissolve. They're almost like a snow globe. When you interact with and work with them, you're feeding them, you're shaking that snow globe, it's all going, but when you stop working with it and it's left, it kind of dissolves and fizzles out. There is a theory that it's kind of like a lava lamp, which when the lava in the lava lamp is heated up by the heating element underneath, that kind of thing has enough energy to be able to manifest and move up, but then what happens is it loses its heat, it loses that, and it sinks back down and disperses into the goop at the bottom of the lava lamp. Again, that's one of those things that is just a theory. But again, it's an interesting point because of course you working with those sorts of things, you do get the sense that they're really stuck. They haven't learned to a certain extent anymore. There of course is such a thing as what we'd call the mighty dead and stuff like that, but you don't normally lump them in the ghost category, and I don't think that many people they would normally associate that kind of a spirit with a deity or something like that, as opposed to with a ghost. So the next thing that we're going on to would be deities themselves, what deities are. So I would think of a deity as essentially some sentient force which has a lot of power, that seems to have a lot of power. So gods, goddesses, that sort of thing. What are you calling that? Well, I tend to split them into two categories: greater gods and minor gods. The greater gods are gods and energy. They exist, that's necessary for the whole of creation to exist. So if you took that force away, this whole house of cards would come crashing down. And minor gods would be more of those things where there's a lot of energy and power there, but is it necessary? Is it 100% necessary for that to exist? Are they more like evolved beings, evolved spirits, that sort of thing? Now, when you look at trying to categorize, and I've done like a basic categorization there, may not be 100% accurate, you know, but at the end of the day, we have to break things down super simple, because you never know who's watching this video. If you look at pantheons, so gods from and goddesses from different cultures, so for example the Greek pantheon, look at that and look at the family tree. What energy comes from what? Well, if you're talking about in terms of almost like a colour wheel, where you've got your primary colours, red, blue and yellow, and then you've got your secondary colours, you know, purple, green and orange, and then you've got the other colours underneath that, basically. Then think of, you know, the greater gods, and then the minor gods, and then the other spirits down there. So where would Zeus factor in? Because Zeus, of course, is considered to be kind of like father of the Olympic gods, the father of the Olympic gods. Well, he's not really a primary colour, is he? Because he came from somewhere else. So you might find Kronos and all that might be one of the primary colours, but he's a secondary colour. And then, of course, he has gods, deities, spirits, energy under that, like Hermes or something like that would be one of his children, which would be a, you know, tertiary colour, and then so on and so forth going down. What we're really talking about is we're talking about energy in its purest form as being primary colours, and then those pure types of forms of energy being mingled together to create a different type of energy, which is then secondary, and then again. So when it's interesting to look and research pantheons and gods and goddesses, what they stand for, which are the older ones and which ones evolved from previous ones. So on a family tree like the Greek kind of Olympic family tree, it's kind of easy to see that. Is a little bit more difficult with something like the Egyptian pantheon. So with the Egyptian pantheon, because you're going with chimeras, which is basically a blending, it does illustrate the point quite well, a blending of animals or different things to create one new thing. So if you think of the primary colours as animals, and then you think of the secondary colours as taking parts of those animals and melding them together to create a new being, like kind of like the Sphinx, where you've got the body of a lion and the head of a human, that sort of thing. If you look at the Egyptian gods, why are they being represented like that? Why have they got different, you know, characteristics? There's not quite there. Now, we're going into some slightly deeper things now, but let's talk about in terms of personification of energy. So of course, whether you believe that gods and goddesses are sentient or not, what you're kind of dealing with is you're dealing with the principles of you're dealing with principles, and you're dealing with energy. So what we struggle to do really is, because of the energy from a psychic level, as witches, as we direct and work with it, we're used to feeling that, feeling what it feels like, feeling what it feels like. So it's difficult to explain that. I find it difficult to explain it to you on the camera. It's going to be very difficult to explain that to another person. However, what we can kind of do is personify that energy. So whether we believe it's sentient or not, that energy, whatever current we're talking about, whether it be the death current or something like that, how could we make that into a person, give it a personality, and what would that look like? What would it sound like? How would it interact? Well, when you're talking of death, then obviously many death gods and goddesses, that sort of thing, they look like skeletons. So you've got the old Grim Reaper, that sort of thing, because of course when you die and you're buried, eventually you turn into a skeleton. So it makes sense that those kind of, when you're talking about death and you're talking about the personification of death and the death current, then that deity, spirit, whatever, might appear as a skeleton. You know, there's a lot of symbology that is used. Now, does that mean that these gods and goddesses don't exist and that you can't interact with them? No. From my personal experience, I tend to take students along the lines of working with and sensing the energy, and manipulating it to get a sense of it and what it's about, immersing yourself in the current to a certain extent. But then very often, without me even saying anything, they'll start to, something will walk out of that current. So if you imagine the current of the death energy is a big lake of black or something like that, that might be what the student envisions it as and feels it. They can feel the movement when they're stood in it and immersing themselves in it. Well, a figure might appear to them out of that, walk out of that, and normally it's the personification of that energy for them. It may come in the form that you may be familiar with, so like death spirits or death gods, goddesses. Santa Marte's one. It doesn't really matter which one it is. They'll either have some personification that they've made up themselves or that's revealed to them and only them, or it may be something that may be a little bit more popular that you may see everywhere. So it may be the Grim Reaper or something like that steps out. Whatever it is them generally, when they get to that point, they normally interact with that. They say that it can talk to them, it can teach them, it can explain the energy. So what is that? Is that the energy itself, the current, literally taking on a sentience and then communicating that through an archetype? Well, that's probably a topic for a more advanced video, but that's generally the easiest way to think about it. So when we're talking about chimeras again, when you're talking about melding together and really trying to understand what something's all about, understanding something in pure energy may be fairly easy, because if something's pure, if something's bright red, you can see it's red. What about when we're talking colours and using as colours for an example, these obscure weird purples or something like that, or whether you've got teal or something, like how do you really describe what that's made up of? If you're an artist, you'd know exactly what colours and in what quantities to mix together to make that colour, which is the point of witches. That's what we aim to do. We aim to have a sophisticated palette. We aim from a psychic level to be able to feel the energy and to say what it's made up of, so we understand it more, and if we understand it and can manipulate it, that's witchcraft. Almost poetic, I think. But there we go. So chimeras and things like that, in terms of humans trying to associate and personify energy, and a spirit appearing before you, so let's assume that spirits do exist and god and goddesses do exist. Well, how does that work? Well, Carl Jung, the famous psychologist, talked kind of about archetypes and that sort of thing. That we have, to a certain extent, a kind of dictionary of images that we can kind of understand as humans. And out of that dictionary, something that's very strange and bizarre and unusual to us, we'll use that dictionary, meld the words together in that dictionary to create a new word, which is what the spirit's all about. So when you talk about summoning something or evoking something in front of you, some sort of spirit that you don't really understand, well, you might as a human not really be able to put that in a category. It may be so bizarre to the human mind that the best it can do is manifest with, your mind reading that, and reading that energy is going to ascribe all these random things and stick them together, because it will be a symbolic thing. So taking apart and deconstructing a chimera, interesting concept, interesting thing. Because of course, it should technically reveal something deep rooted in the human psyche as to what that spirit's all about and the energy that it's made up of. Anyway, we're going a little bit too cuckoo crazy advanced now, aren't we? So in terms of, again, going back to language that we can use, because we'll be using these sorts of terms in other videos, you've kind of got spirits as a general. Spirits are sentient energy forms that don't need a body. You've got, don't like the term ghosts because it's a silly term. At the end of the day, it means too many different things, and you'd just use spirit, wouldn't you? Let's be fair, we've already got that word. So the poltergeist, that kind of thing, the phenomenal of that energy. You've got human spirits, we'll call it, so spirits that are what your stereotypical ghosts would probably be. The dead human, essentially. So you've got that, which is normally the essence, or what's left, kind of the shell that's left over. And then of course we would probably move into the mighty dead, which is someone that has managed to retain their essence and a certain amount of power after they've crossed over, and essentially are kind of like a minor god by that point. A lot of magicians, occultists, aim to get to that point. That is their kind of life's work. That is their work that they're trying to accomplish and use magic to, is to essentially become a god. Whether it be in a living form or, you know, a spirit form. But there we go. I don't want to overcomplicate things too much, so I think we should end the video there. And if you are interested in any more, then please look at the Thoth TV YouTube channel. You can find us on thothwitchcraft.com. If you are a beginner and you don't quite understand anything that I just said, but you find it all quite interesting, and you're on Facebook, go to the Facebook group Witchcraft Live. That is a group we've set up for beginners that has a daily live video feed about a subject to do with basic witchcraft. We also have now the Thoth Mystery School. So the Thoth Mystery School is a Patreon. You'll notice that we're getting series, various different series and things like that are coming out on the Thoth TV YouTube channel. Well, half of the courses we put on for free, and then the other half, the more advanced stuff, we normally put for members of the Thoth Mystery School Patreon page. So if you sign up for membership, then you'll get a lot of more advanced and intermediate techniques and topics. Some stuff that we can't really just put out there, to be honest with you. So thanks for watching.